Hello again, and thank you for joining me in this second virtual pre-concert talk for the 2022 Bellingham Festival of Music. My name is Ryan Dudenbostel, and I am so happy to serve as the festival's program annotator and pre-concert lecturer. This summer's programming features a particular focus on the music of Ludwig van Beethoven, so a number of these talks will be centered around various aspects of his life and work: his politics, his life as a performer, his deafness, and finally his era-defining Ninth Symphony. Now, Beethoven is often referred to as a musical revolutionary, which he absolutely was. But he was a revolutionary in other ways as well, both socially and politically, and that's what we'll be talking about today. Beethoven, the revolutionary. Let's start with the political state of Europe in the late 18th century. This was a time of great social and political upheaval. New technology and increased international trade were creating new sources of wealth and creating, really, for the first time ever, opportunities for economic mobility. Here, we see the beginnings of a new middle class with expendable income and the luxury of leisure time. And what did they do? They read. And they shared ideas with each other. This was the age of enlightenment, when a citizen scientist could go out into his garden with a magnifying glass and make major discoveries. Everyone is questioning everything, especially received knowledge and authority. And consequently, the two major structures of power at the time, the monarchy and the church, find themselves under attack. In his landmark treatise, The Social Contract, published 8 years before the birth of Beethoven, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who's also a composer in his own right, stated, "Suppose we were to ask the greatest of all goods, the good that ought to be the goal of every system of laws, of what precisely does it consist? Well, it reduces itself, we should find, to two major elements, namely liberty and equality." This notion that liberty and equality should be the foundational motivations for the law completely flew in the face of the existing power structure. Rousseau's ideas took off like wildfire, and in large part sparked the revolutionary movements in the American colonies and in France. It was into this world that Beethoven was born in 1770. He was steeped in these new ideas of liberty and equality and was politically outspoken in a way no musician had been before. Beethoven saw himself not just as a craftsman of music, but as a significant agent of change. He was 19 years old when the outbreak of the French Revolution happened in 1789, and he found himself completely absorbed in the moment. In 1800, as revolutionary social ideas were spreading from France throughout the Holy Roman Empire, he wrote to a friend, "When the prosperity of our fatherland is improved, then my art must be directed towards the benefit of the poor. Oh, happy moment, and how lucky I consider myself that I can contribute to this aim, that I myself can bring it to pass." A few years later, in 1806, at a party of his patron, Prince Karl Lichnowsky, with French officers in attendance, Beethoven refused to play when asked. The prince was taken aback and half joked that he'd have Beethoven put under house arrest if he didn't perform. Well, Beethoven stormed out of the house, but responded soon after in a letter. And he said, "Prince, what you are by accident of birth. What I am of myself. There are and will be thousands of princes, but there is only one Beethoven." That a musician would have the audacity to dismiss the status of royalty, and the royalty who is paying him no less, as just a random bit of luck, would be completely unthinkable even a decade earlier. But here was Beethoven doing just that. After the death of Emperor Joseph II in 1790, his successor, the much more conservative Emperor Franz, is said to have refused to have anything to do with Beethoven, claiming there was something revolutionary in that music. And he was absolutely right. Beethoven's music is teeming with references to the revolutionary style. Just think of the Marseillaise. With those ascending intervals and snappy rhythms, they're everywhere in revolutionary music. Here's another example called The Storming of the Bastille. And now listen to this moment from Beethoven's Second Symphony, written in 1802. Beethoven is often criticized as a weak melodist, but the simplicity of his melodies is exactly what lends them this revolutionary character. But the excitement and optimism of the French Revolution was not to be. Napoleon Bonaparte came to power in the early 1790s and declared himself first consul in 1799. Now, early on, Beethoven held Napoleon up as a hero for what he called the rights of man and idolized him as a freedom fighter. He admired Napoleon so much that he wrote his Third Symphony in dedication. But in May of 1804, Napoleon had declared himself the Emperor of France. And upon hearing this news, Beethoven violently scratched Napoleon's name from the symphony's title page. "So he too is nothing more than an ordinary man," Beethoven told a friend. "Now he will trample on all human rights and indulge only in his own ambition. He will place himself above everyone and become a tyrant." And he was right. Napoleon's seemingly unstoppable army spread across Europe, occupying Vienna in 1805 and again in 1809. The tide finally began to turn against the French late in 1812 in the face of withering defeats and catastrophic losses against the Russian army. Emboldened, other European powers joined forces against Napoleon in the following year, leading to his eventual surrender and exile in the spring of 1814. Among the most impressive victories against the French was led by the Duke of Wellington against Napoleon's brother at the Battle of Vittoria on June 21, 1813. In commemoration, Beethoven was approached by a machinist and an inventor named Johann Maelzel to compose a piece for a mechanical orchestra he had created called the Panharmonicon. Now, Maelzel was famous as a maker of automatons, which were all the rage at the turn of the century. They could dance and play music and even write letters. But today, Maelzel is best remembered for the metronome, which he invented in 1817. Anyway, back to this piece for the Panharmonicon. Maelzel supplied the melodies, and Beethoven pieced them together and composed what became his battle symphony, Wellington's Victory. Think of it as Beethoven's 1812 overture, complete with cannons and all kinds of other battle sounds. It's often derided as Beethoven's worst piece, but it's an artifact of the moment. Here's a little bit of it. Beethoven also created a version for real live musicians, which was first performed on December 8, 1813, at a benefit concert for soldiers wounded in the Battle of Hanau 2 months earlier. It was received with the wildest possible enthusiasm, and even if it wasn't Beethoven's best piece, it was perhaps his most timely. And also on the program, as sort of a footnote, was the Seventh Symphony, which we hear in this evening's concert. Now, I've written about this piece extensively in the program notes, so I won't go into too much detail here. But the first movement is rooted on one particular rhythm that is present in almost every measure. Bump, ba-dum, bump, ba-dum, bump, ba-dum, bump, ba-dum, bump. It's a very difficult rhythm to get exactly right. The notation is kind of approximate of the vigor and the snappiness of this rhythm. And orchestras and conductors frequently struggle to get it just the way that their mind imagines it being. And I wanted to share just a little anecdote about the great Italian conductor Arturo Toscanini, who spent much of his career here in the United States. In the 1940s, he was preparing to record this piece with the NBC Symphony, and a very celebrated timpanist named Saul Goodman was in the orchestra. And as they're rehearsing the first movement, Toscanini is saying, timpani, 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 timpani. And Goodman is hearing this and playing louder and louder and louder because that's what he thinks Toscanini wants. Toscanini stops the orchestra and says, Signore Goodman, why do you play so loud? And Saul Goodman said, well, you kept saying timpani, timpani. I thought you wanted to hear more of it. And Toscanini said, no, it's for the ritmo. It's for the rhythm. And that is a story that sticks with me as not only as an enjoyer of Beethoven's music, but also as a conductor, that so much of Beethoven's music is linguistic, is vernacular in style. And his rhythms are not necessarily what the math on the page would indicate, but what the language of that music speaks so naturally. So timpani, timpani, timpani. You'll probably hear that as you hear this piece. So there's a little taste of Beethoven's Seventh and a primer on Beethoven the Revolutionary. Thank you so much for tuning in for this pre-concert talk. I look forward to seeing you virtually from my office through the rest of the summer. Enjoy this program, and I'll see you next time.